Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to check out the latest entry in our podcast series. I am here with Mary Rapaport. She is the founder of the Strategic Playground and the president of the ATD chapter here in Minneapolis. And, Mary brings a lot of experience in leading businesses, teams across customer success, sales, and developing leaders. And we're going to talk today a little bit about leadership and some of the different areas about how organizations can build strategic thinking into their teams and leverage that for learning and development. So, Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Well, I'm excited because I love talking about this stuff, and it gives me a chance to just geek out about my favorite thing. So I appreciate the conversation.
Very good, very good. Yeah, I'm excited as well. This is kind of a really fun topic and timely. When you look at some of the transformations we're seeing, across technology, across businesses in general, I think there's like a really great opportunity for a shift in thinking, and I'm looking forward to diving into the conversation today.
Cool.
So let's start with what you're doing. So I'd love, for you to tell me a little bit about the Strategic Playground and, with your background, just in terms of leading teams, what motivated you to create the company?
Well, I do a lot of work with L&D professionals and with big brands, major brands, helping them figure out their learning strategy. How are they going to help their workforce evolve to deliver on the strategic plan? So in doing that work, I would work with these really sophisticated leaders, pretty impressive credentials. And when we get to the point where we're talking about what the strategy is, the reaction was like, wow, we don't think like this, or, you think differently, and this is really cool. We should be doing more of that. And I just heard this so many times. I'm like, wait a minute, what am I giving them, or what am I doing that's resonating so much? And I started doing some research about strategic thinking, because I'd hear, we just don't do strategic thinking, or we're just not good at it. And so I thought, is this just my clients, or is this like a trend, a thing? And I started just doing research into the problem, and I found this is a really big issue in business, and in particular in leadership development and in professional development. And I thought, as a person who loves creating high impact learning experiences, who believes everyone should be able to think strategically, could I build a program that would help leaders build that skill so that they could be more effective immediately and engage differently in the workplace? So I created the Strategic Playground, and the intention is really everyone can build this skill, and everyone should build this skill. And it's been a great ride ever since. It's been really super fun and so rewarding.
That's really cool. It's so interesting just knowing a little bit about your background. And you talked about, creating high impact training experiences. And, you think about some of the functions you've done that for, where it'd be more traditional. Like I came up in sales. I've been through all kinds of sales training. I know what that looks like, to come in and say, hey, I'm going to create something, the same type of experience for strategic thinking. That's, I'll be honest, I'd never heard of something like that. So, I'm not surprised that a lot of the reactions you got from leaders was that we need to think about this differently. And can I ask, how do you get started in thinking about how am I going to create something like this?
Well, I have a high value for a couple things when I build learning programs and when I'm participating in learning programs. So first of all, I thought, well, could I teach someone to think in ways that I think, or ways that I, like to step into? And the other thing is, can I make it fun? Can I make it approachable? I've been to a lot of programs at universities, Northwestern. I've done some Cornell certificates, some Harvard, and they're great, but they're pretty heavy and they're pretty dense, and they're pretty, they feel a lot of times very remote from the real work that gets done. And I wanted to create something that people could see themselves in, and they could see, oh, this is a situation I just had yesterday. I could have done that, or, oh, now I know what to do. And I wanted it to be fun to attend. I wanted it to be playful. And so it's called the Strategic Playground, because it is intended to kind of bring down those barriers of like, oh, this is a skill I don't know. Can I do this? seems scary. And what we do is we just make the environment very, very approachable. The style is very approachable. The examples are real.
Mhm.
And they get to work on something that's really real life for them. And so
Sure.
those are all the elements. I thought, how can I bring an experience that I would want to have into and deliver that to other people so that they can have an impact? And so that's kind of how I thought about putting that together.
That's really cool. Yeah, when you think about that piece and something that can be very dense, right? Like I think oftentimes people look for like what is the credential going to say as opposed to, what am I looking to get out of something like that? And
Mhm.
so, being able to make it relatable and saying like, okay, do I have these skills? How do I develop this? Like that's something that, making it relatable, but also allowing someone to grow and be effective. I think like that's really meaningful. So big picture, right? So you work with a lot of organizations, a lot of kind of like you said, big time leaders. What do you think? When you think about sort of that next generation, what are the skills leaders really need to succeed today and in the future? What's rising to the top? What are you hearing the most of right now?
Well, the research is showing that organizations are recognizing that strategic and critical thinking are essential for leaders. So the research is really shown, yep, we recognize this is a gap. We need to build these skills. And in particular, as AI is entering the picture and solving
Mhm.
more and more complex problems, um, providing guidance and thinking in ways that we've never seen before. You got to think like, well, what's the contribution of the human person? What does
Yeah,
that look like? And so it really highlights that we need to show up differently and we need to contribute in new ways. Research also shows that organizations are not catching up. Um, Only 9% of organizations feel like they're making any progress at this at all in
interesting.
developing these skills. So there's a huge gap. And when they look at bench strength, I work with a lot of clients that are like, they're great doers. They'll do anything. They'll get right in there. They're urgent. They're dedicated. But when I think about who I have on my bench to promote and to help take the next level of leadership or take my job, there's a huge gap. I've heard
Yeah,
that over and over again, and they don't really, a lot of organizations can't put their finger on what it is. They'll say things that are very different or very vague, but they won't really even know what they're trying to develop for. They'll just be like, yeah, they're not strategic and I don't know how to actually describe
interesting.
what they do. And so I think that's really a big pressure today of us and how we show up and what our value is and how we contribute in conversation and thinking.
Yeah, that's so interesting. They're not really strategic. I've heard leaders say that, in terms of how they're thinking, and oftentimes it's they didn't like a result, right? And so,
Mhm.
you've got these people, and I guess have you noticed maybe for lack of a better word, a divide between those people who are thinking and those who are doing, right? And so, where you get to that point of like these are the
Yeah.
people who are thinking strategically, these are the people who are
Yeah.
only executing. From your perspective, I would guess a lot of people wouldn't agree, but do you think anyone can be a strategic thinker, or do you think that there really is that divide that should exist?
I absolutely think anyone can build strategic thinking skills. Just like any skill or any way of approaching your work and your life, there are certain people that are going to really love to do it, and
Mhm.
then certain people are going to be like, I need to do this, and this is good for me, but I don't. It's not. I don't feel comfortable. I don't love it. I don't necessarily feel confident. But I built this program. Um, not only because I saw a need, but because in my work, I have worked for leaders who have basically been like, you know what? Stay in your lane.
Yeah,
We'll do the thinking,
we've
and
got
you
it.
just focus on execution. And
Yeah,
I found that at any stage in my career, I found that really demotivating. I'm like, well, I have some ideas, or I want to help tackle the problem because it's intellectually interesting to me, or it means something to me. And so, part of the reason I created the strategic playground and built it the way that I did is that I believe that everyone should be able to develop this skill and should. And I want to democratize strategic thinking. I don't want it to be in the C-suite. I don't think that's how it works. I don't think that's how organizations grow. And when organizations do that, they begin to see a bigger and bigger gap. And they don't necessarily realize that their culture reinforces this divide between the thinkers and the doers. And I'm all about like break that down, because you'll have more ideas, you'll have more engagement, you'll have more creativity, more innovation, your business results will rise.
Yeah, I think for a lot of companies, when you put it that way, and hearing that, the gut reaction would be, whoa, we want this. We want there to be strategic thinking across our organization. We want people to have agency to make decisions and to give ideas. And, if we have a culture that doesn't foster that right now, I want to change that. So, in your experience helping large organizations, what strategies work to close that gap? Because if I'm a CEO and I hear that that's what my culture looks like, and that's the result, I immediately want to fix that. So how do you close the gap?
Well, I think for those organizations that go, oh, we've been missing this, or we shouldn't be operating in this way, we need to make a change. I think the very first thing I always try to encourage is, let's recognize that. Let's recognize where that's showing up, and let's connect the business impact with the thinking, the thinking gap, right? Mm-hmm. So often they need some help to really see what that problem is, and then to name the problem. So they might say stuff like, big, bold ideas, we just don't seem to be able to generate those. Or, we get a lot of stuff done, but I don't see a lot of fresh thinking. Or they'd be like, we're always reacting. We're really, really great at service. We're really great at responsiveness. We solve a problem immediately when it shows up, but we don't ever seem to get out ahead of these things. Or, it might be like, I don't think we have a lot of thought partners that we can go to in the organization. So we kind of try to get them to recognize that the language they're using to describe strategic thinking, a strategic thinking gap, is what they've been saying. And so once they go, oh, is that what it is? Then, it's really important for them to understand what they want to see differently. So then, let's be clear. What are you seeing showing up that ideally you'd like to shift? So we know that we're designing, we're engineering for a very specific impact that they want to see in their organization.
Sure.
And then when it comes to learning it, I offer a great series of workshops, just, short focused modules that let people try it. I want them to bring the work you're doing. What are you working on right now? What's a challenge you're just sort of wrestling with, or you want to think bigger or better about? What's a project? And when they can work on a project that's actually something that they do every day, or a real meaty thing that they're trying to make sure they have the right impact around, that makes a difference, because then it makes sense to them. Then it's valuable. Then it's real. You're not sort of going, I'm going to carve out some time. I'm going to go do a training. I'm going to go do some thinking, and then I'll come back to the real world.
Then I'll come back and do exactly what I was doing before I left for the training. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Okay. I'll pick that book up off the shelf next week, because that was really fun. No, the faster you can integrate real world examples, the faster you can integrate their work into how they're learning and bring situations and scenarios to the discussion, the more they see that, how they can do that when they leave the room, and the value and what it generates that's missing from the work and the approach and the conversations they're already having.
Yeah, you said a lot there that I definitely agree with, and just kind of been thinking about that piece of, hey, how do we make this relatable to our jobs, right? Like, how do we make this something that's there? Because you're ultimately going to get more engagement, but then you're also going to be able to see the difference between, here's how I would approach this normally, and then here's what it's going to be like if I'm able to have that agency to take a step back and to think more strategically, and to maybe attack my job in a different way. How can a company reframe the employee development as far as like how they reward that type of thinking, right? So, it takes a lot for someone who's never really been able to think strategically or doesn't feel like they've been able to go out on a limb and to, start acting that way. Like how do you measure that, and, how do you reward that from I guess a development perspective?
Well, if there is a cultural prohibition from inviting people to think with you, you're going to have a lot more difficulty, because the systems, the engagement, and probably how you've been hiring is all wired to be, I'm going to take your direction, I'm going to wait till you decide, and then I will execute the heck out of that. So if the culture has already been designed so that the thinking and the doing are separated, it's a little bit harder. If an organization says, okay, no, this wasn't really our intention, but somehow we got here and we kind of want to make some change. If there's a couple things that I teach. One is really helping leaders recognize the value of changing up the conversation. So we have team meetings, and what do they focus on? Like action. What did you do? Did you get this done? What's happening? Someone surfaces a problem. We immediately solve it in the 10 minutes that we're here. Then we go out and we don't really dive deep. We don't really invite points of view. We don't really necessarily even bother to connect what we're working on to the goals of the organization.
Yeah.
So there's some things leaders can do just in the one-on-ones they have, in the team meetings they have, and in how they ask questions. Questions are a powerful teacher. I mean, anybody who's a coach can tell you questions are what their superpower is. They ask those provocative questions to drive thinking. You can also do that to help elevate strategic thinking and elevate conversations. So that's what leaders can do. If you are not a leader and you are working in a dynamic where you are always accustomed to having a leader think for you and then tell you what to do, but you want to surface an idea, or you want a deeper discussion, or you notice something that you say, hey, I think this is worth talking about. There are different ways you can ask for permission and space to say, hey, can we just take 30 seconds here? I'm seeing something that maybe will help us achieve that goal. Could we take a minute? Or ways to align that thought with what the leader is after. So you might be, John, you always talk about how important it is for us to fix X problem. I wonder if you'd be open to hearing just a couple ideas that I had, or that we were talking about, or some data that we found that maybe could shine some light on that. So there are ways that you can, whether you are the person who's leading the initiative, or you are just someone who wants to be heard or wants to facilitate a conversation a little bit better, you have the opportunity to kind of elevate that. And then everyone finds that, in my experience, everyone finds that conversation way more energizing and rewarding, because it honors our ability to think and our contributions in the workplace.
I had a manager once who had kind of said to me in a one-on-one, I think you already know what you want to do here. Why don't you tell me? And I kind of pressed him on that a little bit and said, well, why did you put it that way? And he said, well, to do an effective one-on-one, he said, more often than not, people, in these individual conversations, they're going to have the answer, or what they think is the answer. And I think, kind of getting them to volunteer that. So that's a really important part of this piece. Like, I'm obviously here to guide you. I'm here to give feedback, to pressure test whatever it is you're saying. But nobody had really ever said, like, I think you already know what you want. I'd had a lot of those jobs and experiences where it was, go do this, go do this, go do this. And, it's so interesting because we do have organizations that will come to us at ETU and say, hey, I don't think our managers know how to do one-on-ones. And, so whatever that looks like, they want to give them an experience to say, okay, we've got these very smart, very capable people that we think can be good leaders, but they've never really been shown how to lead. And so oftentimes they think, because I've been promoted to manager, that means my ideas are the best. And what I'm going to do is have you go execute on my ideas. Like, my doing days are over, my thinking days are here. And now you get to go be the doer. And so it's so interesting. So for us, we build immersive simulations through our platform, and a big selling point for our tool is to provide that opportunity to have a safe space to practice. So for that hesitant new manager who probably isn't going to raise his or her hand and say, I don't know how to do a one-on-one, or I don't know how to foster a strategic thinking conversation. We give them that safe space to practice. I guess, what are your thoughts on using some of those simulated experiences, whether it's through, immersive simulation platform like ours, one-on-one coaching, to help somebody get to the point where they're doing something effectively?
I think simulations and scenarios are fantastic, with the caveat that they need to really reflect a situation that I have found myself in, or that I'm worried about finding myself in. And when that is, so it has to really be relevant and related to what I anticipate I might encounter. And when they do, they're like, oh, okay, wow. Either, oh, I just did this, I think I know what to do, or I have no idea what to do. And then you get that sort of real time experience. And it's a safe place. It's a safe place to try things. It's a safe place to learn. But when they are really aligned with reality, and we've all been through those simulations that are just really it's very obvious what you should choose.
Yes.
And I don't think those do very much good, because then you're just kind of gaming the system and you're clicking through, and yeah. But when there's a lot of nuance in the scenario and there's a lot of ambiguity in how you might interact or what you might choose next, it's really about driving your awareness of the thinking that you're bringing to the situation.
Yeah.
So, I use scenarios in the workshops. I know that you guys develop great scenarios, great simulations, and it's just really all about the quality of that conversation you're having in that simulation, and the thought that's gone into it of making it, not just real world and a little ambiguous, so that you can, try.
Yeah, I think a good simulation is challenging, right? To your point, where it's very obvious and you're not even listening, you're not paying attention, you're just choosing because you're a reasonably smart person who can get through it. But when every one of the answers that you could choose, or the situation comes up with, wow, there's a few things I would say here, or all of those choices look reasonable to me, and you have to give it real thought. In the moment, that's not really something you can do. So, if you're having a one-on-one with me and I put you, kind of a tough question to you, you don't get 10 minutes and you don't get a chance to completely get it wrong, right? So I think that safe space to practice and having that ambiguity is, like you said, it drives learning more than anything else too, because you're actually engaged, you're actually applying it to something that you're doing, and you're seeing what the outcome is, if right or wrong, from that perspective. So yeah, I agree with that, just in terms of measuring skills, and it helps you identify some of your own skill gaps too.
Yeah, my favorite ones are the ones where I answer it and I think I kind of know, right? I kind of know. And there's another one that I'm like, well, that sounds maybe that's, I don't know if that's right, but that sounds right too. And then it says, that was good, but let's take your thinking up. And it tells you basically like, okay, that's pretty good, but here's why you could have chosen this other thing and what the impact would have been. And then because that just feels like, oh, I see now how I might just approach that differently and take my skills up a notch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, kind of back to the one-on-ones, if you think about that type of simulation where, you give a good answer and your direct report walks away and you kind of shrug and say, okay, that went pretty well, versus, you give the best answer. And then what that does for that person, what that does for whatever they're working on, kind of their development, your development as a leader, there's a lot that's there. So I agree, like having that was good, but there could have been more. We all can use feedback. So it's the kind of thing to, especially when you're learning. So, I want to bring it back to the beginning a little bit. You talked about just a lot of change that's happening across organizations right now, as it relates to generational change, technology change with AI, kind of these gaps that exist across the board where maybe there's just no bench, anywhere. So if I'm leading a large organization, I would kind of say, okay, there's maybe a lot here, right? It's like there's a lot of jobs that are changing. We're reskilling employees. We have to look at hiring differently. This is a big undertaking. What are a couple of things that, an L&D leader can do, let's say this quarter, right? We're still in July. I've got most of Q3 left. what can they do this quarter to really improve strategic thinking across their team?
Yeah, I think that it's always first about understanding what you're looking for, right? In fact, I was just working with a client last week who was like, hey, we're getting ready to do our discovery conversations for planning the next year.
Yeah.
And so we're starting, and I'm like, well, that's fantastic. So they're starting to interview their leaders about where they're seeing the gaps. And so, I'm always like, well, they're probably not going to identify and be able to name a gap in strategic thinking. So here's what you should listen for. So I think, first of all, doing discovery is fantastic activity. And the best L&D people, they do that. They do that formally, informally, but being able to listen between the lines and be curious, that's also pretty essential. I think to be a great strategic partner to leaders in the organization, L&D leaders need to think as much like business people, and maybe more like business people than like L&D people. So they might not think to do some things that will really increase their credibility and really help them identify needs that they're in a great position to solve. One is like, learn the business strategy. How is the company, not just what are the goals of the company, but do you understand how they plan? How does the organization plan to achieve those goals? Put your business person hat on first, and then your L&D thinking hat on second.
Mm-hmm.
And really, be able to see what are the behaviors that are holding someone back. What are the things that they could be doing from a development perspective? I think also asking questions. I have a tool called Powerful Questions, which is really a simple list of things that you can bring to any meeting, whether you are leading the meeting or just this is the first time you're learning about whatever they're talking about, that will help drive a better strategic discussion at a bigger level. And just modeling that behavior and demonstrating that behavior, that's teaching, right? Not everything needs to be a formal learning program, although by calling attention to something and prioritizing it as something like that and bringing a program in, you absolutely are signaling what's important and what is valued and where the directional energy is going from a development perspective. But though, those are some really great things. You can use offsites. You can use team building. Like I often tell my clients, go do one of those escape rooms. They're like, oh yeah, we love that. We tried that. It was a great fun. And I'm like, yeah, but the important part is the debrief. You have to be noticing things. You can't just play along. You've got to say, hey, Jen, you were really stumped at that one point and you got really frustrated. And then you had a breakthrough. What was going through your mind? How did you bridge that gap? Or what was different for you and how you were thinking? And just use everyday things that can be developmental experiences. Go to conferences. Ask people questions at networking, like how are you solving a problem? Curiosity is really at the heart of building better strategic thinking. You have to really be curious and want to understand, why is that happening? How does this happen? What if something was different? And what about my thinking that I already have going on is holding me back from that big breakthrough? That's kind of like the four things that I always pose.
Yeah, I like that. What about my thinking is holding me back? It's interesting. You talked about powerful questions. I had a leader once who would come to meetings and, it was, let's say, 2 levels above where she would normally interact. And, she would monthly say, okay, you all get to ask me a direct question. So she flipped it on the team. And it was, that sort of idea of you're going to ask something direct about the strategy. And it's going to foster this kind of developmental conversation for you. One, it'll help you improve, your own discovery skills so you can get better at asking the right questions. But then 2, kind of give you that point of like, hey, we're here to work on this together. This is our strategy. This isn't my strategy. So you can ask me some direct questions. And it was really effective. And so I think, like you said, it's not some really big initiative where we're going to redo everything, but it's let's take some time in a monthly meeting and, let's start small, but start small in a way that's going to have a really big impact. So I think that, like you said, there's a lot of opportunity to do that, whether it's at an offsite, it's in a weekly meeting, a monthly meeting, something like that. There's small changes you can make to start building this out.
Yeah, for sure. That sounds like a great leader.
Yeah,
Someone
definitely.
who really understood that opportunity and set an expectation for someone to show up in a way that was probably quite different from how they normally would have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, there's an opportunity for more leaders to act, and do similar things. So, I want to wrap us up a little bit here, but, before doing so, where, if someone wants to learn more about the strategic playground or, kind of explore how you can help organizations, where would they start? Where can they find you?
Well, my website's a great start, and I have a lot of free resources anybody can download, just take to a meeting, or just struggling with something or want to see something fresh. Strategicplayground.co is the website. So go there and, look at the Strategic Playground resources, download those. Always someone can reach out to me. And I'm sure you'll put all those resources in the notes here.
We
So
definitely will.
I'm happy to chat with anyone. Like I said, this is fun to be able to talk about something I really, really care about. And I love doing that. If you want to call me and talk to me about what some of your challenges are, or why your leaders aren't showing up in a way that you really want, and how you can accelerate that, that's really what I love to do. And yeah, happy to help.
That's fantastic. Yeah, we thought it was such a cool mission, and we're so glad to get connected. So, from anybody listening to, you can certainly check out etu.co. We'll have all of Mary's contact information there available for, where you can download this if you're streaming it, and get a copy of it. But, thank you, Mary, so much for taking the time to talk with me here today. Really enjoyed the conversation, and, look forward to engaging on this topic more and in the future. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks again. It's always great to talk to you, and you always have great questions. So I appreciate it.
All right, thanks so much.
All right.